Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining the Society for Clinical Research Sites for our a Good Technical Practices webinar. Today's presentation is the Clinical Research Site of the Future. Are you ready for virtual trials? We have more presenters than usual. Today we will be chaired by Claire Grace at Syneos Health, and we've got panelists Terry Burkhart, Megan Caldron, Amanda Rangel, Holly Robertson, Scott Trieber, and Michael Tucker. As their sections appear, you'll see where they work, and they can do a little bit more introduction of who they are and what they do at their companies. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A panel. It's found at the bottom right of your WebEx window. You can send questions in during that. And our chair and panelists will do their best to answer the questions in the time allotted. For more information on all of our webinars and our member benefits, please visit us at myscrs.org and browse to the Members Only tab. Immediately following today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a survey. In order for you to successfully receive your contact hour credit, you must be logged into WebEx as an individual, remain present for the webinar in its entirety, and complete the post-webinar survey. If these three requirements are met, you will receive a contact hour certificate via email within 30 days. There is no contact hour credit offered for listening to the recording of this presentation. This presentation will continue for approximately 1 hour, and we're glad to turn it over to Claire Grace at Syneos Health.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate it. So today, as Michael said, our webinar is to discuss the clinical research site of the future. And the aim of today's presentation is to help you understand the reasons behind many of the new technologies that we have and new methodologies that are coming to the forefront in the virtual trial space. But more importantly, to share with you some of the challenges and the successes, both from the sponsor and CRO side, but also from the site side. And that's why we have such a wide range of panelists today. So we have people that are representative from the solution provider side, but also from the site side that are able to talk about how they implemented these systems or methodologies or technologies and some of the challenges and benefits that they saw from them. So I think hopefully there'll be some nice takeaways for the audience. So our panelists today, we have Amanda Rangel, Megan Caldron, Michael Tucker, Holly Robertson, Scott Trieber, and Terry Burkhart, and they're going to go in pairs to discuss 3 separate technologies. But before that, we are going to have an overview on the sort of virtual space and the development of virtualization within the clinical trial space that Michael will share with everybody on the line. Just a reminder that it is a very tightly packed schedule because we have so many people on. And so if you can log any questions in the chat box or in Q&A, we will look at those. And then when we have some time at the end, we will aim to address the most common question for each of the areas that comes through. If we don't get time at the end, we will look to collect all of the Q&A, and we'll support by answering those and providing written responses via the SDRS to everybody. This is standard faculty disclosure for today with all of the relevant presenters. And so I'm going to hand over to Michael now to take us through the virtualization of clinical trials and the story to date.
All right, thank you, Claire, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm just going to lead off with a little bit of an understanding about virtual trials. We talk about virtual trials and we talk about trial virtualization, and there are there's a lot of technology or terms that are used in the industry, but a lot of people don't really think about why we're turning to virtual trials or virtualization as an effective tool in clinical research. And what we've seen in the industry over the past several years is this massive change or flow of how people participate in a clinical trial or how they want to participate in a clinical trial. But there's a lot of evidence out there from some of the research that's been going on. You can see some of the references here with SysGrip and Covance and the impact reports from Tufts about why people are turning towards virtualization. For example, 23% of trial participants say they're unhappy with their site location. It's too difficult to get into a site location, or it's too difficult to find parking, or other reasons why they feel that it's not good for them to participate in the trial at a normalized site. About 11% of the participants say that visits are too time consuming. Oftentimes we ask patients to come into a trial site. They have to drive half an hour or 45 minutes to get there, find their parking, get into the center, get registered, and then we spend 15 minutes talking to them, and then they're on their way back home. And we think of it as a 15-minute session, but it's really a 3-hour session out of their day, and so it becomes too time-consuming for them to participate. From a sponsor perspective, oftentimes we see site startups that are extraordinarily high for us to start our trials. We also see that in many of the studies that patients participate in, about 30% of the patient dropout occurs before the study ends. So patients may start a study but not see it all the way to completion because they don't feel engaged, because they feel like these other items that are already talked about here with the site location and being too time consuming are impacting their lives too much, and so they'll leave the study. We also see that about 80% of the sites that we have on studies are failing to enroll to their targets. That may not mean that they don't fully enroll, but they may not enroll in the time frame that we need them to, and so it extends our studies out for longer periods of time and becomes more costly for us as organizations. So over time, as I said, we've seen this changing landscape of what we call source data. We've seen technologies that have been introduced to the environment that patients are starting to use from home. So we start to see this shift from all of the data being collected at trial sites to more and more data being collected from a patient's home or their work or wherever they might be in their daily lives. And so we have to start looking at our trials with a sense of an urgency to change the way that we engage our patients. So utilizing a dial methodology, thinking about how do we make trials more virtual or less virtual, depending on the trial type, depending on the therapeutic area, depending on the types of patients that may be participating. And so we have to have that leverage in there to determine at the study level how much virtualization is appropriate for our studies. And some may be completely virtual trials. We'll be talking a little bit about that today, and one of our representatives will be talking about her experience on a completely virtual trial, et cetera. We'll be able to highlight some of the benefits of those trials, but we also know that there are still trials out there where patients need to be seen face-to-face or want to be seen face-to-face. So this whole idea of hybridization of virtual trials, having some visits that are on-site, some visits that are remote, and giving tools to the patients to make those decisions on when they want to participate remotely versus on-site. If we look at the evolution of eClinical, this is really what's fueling this virtualization, this growth of the industry, moving in the early 1990s from paper to an EDC platform, and then introducing things like ePro and eCOA, electronic health records, different types of eSource platforms, risk-based monitoring, being able to start leveraging the technologies of today, smartphones that people have in their hands where they can share information for BYOD information, adding in things like big data analytics and then sensors, wearable sensors in the 2000s, 2010 timeframe, to the point today where we have these capabilities now to determine how much virtualization is appropriate for our trials. We think about the patient journey. The patient is really a partner with us in the clinical trials, and as they come into a trial site or as they come into a trial, they're looking to do a couple of things. First, they want to learn about the study, so they go out to places like clinicaltrials.gov, talking to their clinicians, looking at registries, but learning about a trial that may be appropriate for them to participate in, and then engaging with the site through a study portal or a site portal, perhaps, or coming into the trial site and learning about the study, going through the consent process and having tools like Econsent that allows them to more effectively understand the information. utilizing tools like online screening tools to help determine whether or not that study is appropriate for them or they're appropriate for that study, and be able to share their information through tools like ePro and eCOA, and have the ability to not necessarily come into a trial site sometimes, but have these remote visits where they can use telemedicine or virtual platforms, and we'll be sharing some of that today through one of our partners. And then finally is really looking at how do we get that data back to the patients, the ability for them to feel like they've contributed their data and now they want to learn about what does that mean for them in the trial space? What does that mean for them in standard of care after the trial is completed? But being able to share that information back to them so that they can have access to their own data and understand how it was used in the trial. And that will help them to decide whether or not they want to participate in another trial in the future. So this whole idea of the patient journey and patient centricity and participation in these clinical trials is key to all of these technologies we're going to talk about today. So we'll start off just talking about eConsent, and just a little bit of background on myself. I've been working with electronic informed consent and virtual trials for about 8 years now. We've worked with a lot of different organizations, have a lot of experience and what I would consider best practices from the industry, as well as working to change regulations in both the U.S. as well as outside the U.S. For these types of technologies. Joining me today is a friend and one of our colleagues, Dr. Holly Robertson, who works at Duke Clinical Research Institute, and she's going to talk about a particular trial. She's right now the project leader for the world's largest virtual trial with over 14,000 patients who have consented and are participating online. And she's going to talk about some lessons learned that she's had from this trial and share some valuable numbers and understanding of how this has impacted the way that DCRI is looking at running these types of large pragmatic clinical trials. So first, I just want to give you a brief understanding of how we look at eConsent, and I say we, being an industry, how we consider eConsent. It's really two parts. It's education of the patient through the use of different types of media, whether it's text, graphics, audio, video, podcasts, websites, a number of different ways of reaching out to a patient, but helping to convey the information that's important for them to understand about that study, their rights and responsibilities, their alternatives, what are the risks, what are the benefits. So making sure that the patients understand those core principles before they decide to participate in a clinical trial. The second part of electronic informed consent is the ability for that patient to complete the documentation that's necessary to participate in a clinical trial. It is a process. It's not an endpoint. So when a patient has signed the informed consent document, it doesn't end the process. It's simply part of the entire process of participating in that trial. There may be amendments, additional learnings later on down the road. So any eConsent platform needs to be able to manage that just like we would in a paper-based environment. Just a few of the milestones for those of you who may not be familiar with what's going on in the eConsent space. The first FDA-approved eConsent was actually done on the remote study back in 2010. This is a highly publicized one. You can look at it in the industry. It was done on a virtual trial, but in order to do that, Pfizer, the FDA, and the organization providing the technology had to work very closely together to define what those processes were to make sure that the patients were cared for, that they were watched after, and that all of the relevant regulations were followed in delivering the informed consent. In this particular case, it was a remote informed consent, so patients were being identified remotely, participating remotely, and sharing their information over the internet. There was growth from there through international growth going into other countries, working with health authorities, working with ethics committees to start to define what does eConsent mean in those organizations or those countries, what are those regulations that need to be followed, and in some cases helping to change some of those regulations. In about 2015, the draft guidance for the USDA came out, and US FDA came out, and they asked for contributions from industry. Many of you on the phone may have participated in sharing your information. Vendors like the company I work for did share information, our best practices to the industry, and that was finalized in 2016 with the FDA guidance. If you have not read the FDA guidance, I would highly encourage you to do so. It's fairly easy reading. It's about 13, 14 pages, but it answers some of the most pressing questions about what an electronic informed consent document or system should look like. There was further international growth in 2016, where we started to see some countries that hadn't participated previously start to participate and start to challenge some of the regulatory standings in some of those countries as far as collection of patient data internationally, being able to provide electronic signatures, meeting some of the regulations, the newer regulations like GDPR. So many of those things are affecting even today how we approach electronic informed consent. And then growth in the industry as well, this whole idea of adoption by groups like Transcelerate and CTTI, which is a partnership between the FDA and Duke Clinical Research, and being able to start to define some of the practices or policies that we should be following in electronic informed consent. And then more recently, we're starting to see those changes being implemented in other countries like England. We had the MHRA and HRA last year provide their guidance on eConsent as well. So it's a process that we go through with electronic systems, and we continue to see these milestones in eConsent as countries start to adopt and start to change their regulations, or eConsent adopts to meet the regulations in those countries as well. These are just a few of the benefits that we've seen in the past 10 years utilizing eConsent. We know there are benefits for patients, there's benefits for sites, there's benefits for the sponsors and CROs, and there are other stakeholders that we don't talk about as often, like the ethics committees and the IRBs that are getting benefits from the use of electronic informed consent as well. Some of the highlights for patients is that we can demonstrate patients have a better understanding of the information that's presented to them. They have a consistency across all the sites with all the patients getting the same type of information, and they feel more engaged in participating in the clinical trial. There's a lot of documentation out now about what sites are seeing, and we can share some of that with you in the use of eConsent, the value that they see in reducing staff burden, improving the quality of the information, enforcing that certain things are done, like no missing signatures, no missing documents, the right version of the document is shared, you have the right date and timestamp on each document, those types of compliance risks that you can reduce at the trial site. And then the communications, obviously, between the site and the monitors and CROs. And then the sponsors and CROs have access to better information, more timely information, and they're able to do things like remote monitoring. So what I'd like to do now is turn this over to Holly Robertson. Dr. Holly Robertson, again, is project lead for Duke Clinical Research Institute, and she's in charge of the world's largest virtual trial. It's called the Adaptable study. And the real question that Duke had when they started engaging with the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute was, how do we run a trial of this size without spending over $100 million to do it and make sure that we get good data in there? And so they started designing what they wanted to do and then engaged with a vendor to provide the technology for them to do this as a virtual trial. So Holly, I'd like to turn it over to you and let you take us through the next few slides.
Great, thanks, Michael. I appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to talk to you today about the Adaptable study and what we've learned so far. So as Michael mentioned, this study is a virtual trial, but had the aim of being a pragmatic study. So we were really looking to reduce both the effort burden as well as the cost burden to sites. And when we looked at the Adaptable study, we wanted to really make sure that we were taking into consideration the key aspects of the study as we looked at how we were going to leverage a patient portal and complete electronic consent. So for this study, we're actually leveraging a coding or a computable phenotype to identify eligible patients across participating healthcare systems. And this oftentimes leads to the identification of really large numbers of eligible patients rapidly. So it's not uncommon for the larger healthcare systems to have somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 eligible patients. We also do not have any required clinic visits, and this is including enrollment. So there is the opportunity to identify a patient through this coding algorithm, reach out to this patient electronically through email or through a MyChart, have them visit the portal and enroll themselves and complete all of their visits. So we wanted to be able to manage these patient populations and be able to make sure that we maintained integrity, that the right patients were enrolling, and also to be able to tie back to their electronic health data for collection of outcomes. So what we came up with is a web portal and the use of a unique code for patients. So if you look at the screenshot here, it's got a code, and you see that 5-digit code that's been entered in. And what we did was the first 2 codes actually represent the site. So that allows for the system to know that this patient is coming from a specific site. And then the last 3 are unique to that patient. So the site receives these codes in batch. It allows for them to align. Golden tickets is what we called them in the Adaptable study, but it allows for the alignment of that code to all of their eligible patients and facilitates managing the approach and enrollment of those patients. That patient has their unique identifier, which allows them to gain access to the portal. It allows the portal system to know which informed consent should be presented to that patient. So we do have unique informed consents for each of the participating sites, so it was important to be able to have that partitioning. And then the third function of that code is to allow for checking to ensure that the correct patient enrolled. So if a specific individual was approached to enroll in the study, we can check using the golden ticket to make sure that that was the patient who did enroll. And it also acts as the common unique identifier across all of the data sources, including the data in the portal, the electronic health data that we're using, and claims data that we're linking to, so that we can maintain that de-identified code for the patients. The other thing that we did was we randomized patients in their follow-up. So we were looking to see what's the most efficient way to conduct virtual trials. So we actually randomized our patients both to their dose of aspirin for the study, but also to their follow-up visit. So we have patients coming back either every 3 months or every 6 months. And this is going to allow us to assess when patients do not need to come in for any visits, do we have better adherence to visit schedules with either 3 or 6 months. So once a patient uses their ticket or their code to get into the system, we then wanted to consider how do we make sure that the patient has been properly informed prior to signing the informed consent. And for our process, we have 3 methods of presenting key aspects of the study prior to the patient signing. So initially, they have the opportunity to watch a video that goes over the key components of the trial. Once they've completed the video, they will then read the same information but in text form. And then as a third step, we have 6 comprehension questions that really, again, get to the key aspects of the trial, of what they need to understand prior to consenting to the study. If after going through those 3 parts, they're still interested in participating in the study, we have a couple of key exclusion criteria just to make sure, again, with not having these patients come into the clinic, it's really important to make sure that they really are truly eligible for the study. So they'll answer a couple of those questions, and then they're presented with the informed consent to sign. When we looked at what was really important for making sure that this was able to be successfully conducted as a virtual trial, it was really important to make sure that the language was patient-friendly and easy to understand. So for the Adaptable study, we actually have patient partners that are members of the study team. We have 9 in total, and they coined themselves as the adapters. But they really help to look at what's the language used in the informed consent, what's the presentation of the comprehension questions, and making sure that it is really presented in a way that patients who would be eligible for this study would be able to easily understand the goals of the study, the requirements of participants who are joining the study, and be able to provide consent in a proper way. So our patient partners have been involved with us from the very beginning in helping to design the content and making sure that it's really done in an appropriate way. The other consideration that we had is understanding that not all patients currently have access to technology that would allow them to participate in a virtual trial, but we did not want to bias the study and exclude them. So we do actually have an option for patients who don't have consistent access to technology or are uncomfortable with using technology. For these patients, we do have an option for them to still consent through the patient portal, but we use a call center for completing follow-up visits. And this has allowed for us to be inclusive in the enrollment for the Adaptable study.
All right, Holly, thanks very much. Let's just wrap up with the last 30 seconds or so here in understanding how this has affected patient retention. People are asking questions about patient comprehension. Do patients who use this technology have a better comprehension? Do they retain or stay on the study longer? And these are really some comparable results. The industry average for patients who show up at a trial site that are interested in participation, they say, I'm interested in participating, I want to learn more. Of every 100 patients that show up, 13 of those patients consent, 9% get randomized, and 7% complete the study. Holly, you've seen significant increase in those numbers on your study, and I see they're on the right-hand side of the screen there. You want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So to date, we've had over 30,000 interested patients visit the portal. Of those, we've had almost 14,500 patients who have enrolled, and then just a slightly smaller number of those patients that have randomized. And right now, our overall visit completion is really high. So we have over 88%, almost 90% of our patients that are returning and completing the visits. We've been enrolling for almost 3 years. So the nice thing is that using this consent process and introducing the study in a virtual way has resulted in significantly higher retention and visit completion, which is great.
Thank you very much, Holly. I think if you can advance the slides one more screen for us. There we go. We'll turn it over to Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Holly, if you could hand me presenter rights. Just drag the... Oh, you know what? I did it for myself. Okay, hi, everyone. My name's Amanda Rangel. I'm currently VP of Business Development for VirTrial. I've spent, let me advance real quick. There we go. I've spent over 15 years working in sites in clinical research, and so I can certainly empathize with the heartbreak of this scenario. You've spent countless hours, weeks, and months to find the needle in the haystack. That patient that has a rare disease is currently on no medications and just so happens to have a twin brother with blue eyes living in Minnesota. And then you're discussing the visit schedule with them. You show them how many times they have to come to the site, and they say, I'm so sorry, I can't do that. I have to spend the summer helping my twin brother with blue eyes living in Minnesota. That's obviously an exaggeration, but we know how difficult it is to match patients to the long list of inclusion-exclusion criteria we find. And so then we cry. So what if you could make the visit schedule more flexible for patients? So Michael mentioned earlier a hybrid model. So if only those visits that really need to be done in the clinic are done in the clinic, whereas the other 25 to 40% that could be done via a remote video chat, or sending the patient to a local lab for a blood draw, or including a home health nurse, could allow the patient to remain in or near their home. And why stop there? We've heard some great input from Michael and Holly on some mobile technologies. We all know that in between visits, patients can forget about the study and become non-compliant. And the burden on the site to make continual phone calls when most people don't answer their phone or listen to voicemails anymore is very time-consuming as a coordinator who could better use that time seeing more patients. So technologies that allow automated and HIPAA and GDPR compliant SMS and or email reminders for appointments, medication compliance and e-diaries, as well as continual encouragement and information about the study could really significantly reduce the burden on both the coordinator and the patient, making it much easier to keep the patient engaged along their entire journey of participation in the study. So, telemedicine has been used in healthcare for well over 10 years, but not so much yet in clinical research. So we wanted to just show some simple images of what a video chat looks like. Here we're launching a call to our patient, and this is much like a FaceTime or Skype, but HIPAA and GDPR compliant and much more capabilities to make it functional for the remote video visit. So for example, additional people can be pulled into the video chat. So you see a plus sign up here. So for example, maybe it's an Alzheimer's patient whose family member lives in another state. You can pull them in so that they can be a part of the visit. Or if the patient and coordinator are speaking and maybe the patient is presenting with adverse event symptoms, the coordinator can pull in the PI or sub-I who may be doing rounds at another clinic that day. So it's really all about flexibility and providing flexible options for the patient to participate. So we've already seen a lot of the benefits. Here's some more data and statistics for all of us who love that in the science industry. But, you know, the obvious benefit is the ability to increase retention and compliance. And we already saw from Michael and Holly that there is a 30% dropout rate in the standard phase 3 trial. Not much has been done in the virtual space, but early studies show that that can be reduced by almost 25%, showing 3 to 5% dropout rates in virtual trials. The other obvious is increased patient satisfaction. So 77% of patients who have tried virtual visits actually report a very high level of satisfaction. And 79% of patients that have done an in-office visit, they find it very convenient for a follow-up virtual visit, and that it's easier than having to come back in for a traditional office visit just for that follow-up. And then before I hand over to our site representative, Megan, increased site satisfaction. You know, we have to remember how important sites are in the clinical research ecosystem, and their success impacts all of us. The timeliness of completion of the project and, you know, patients retaining in the trial. So for sites, being able to do remote video chat visits or just remote visits means they're more efficient. They have more capacity to see more patients and do more visits. Also, more frequent patient contact allows real-time reporting of adverse events. So if you don't see the patient for 6 months and then you find out they've you know, been in the hospital, keeping closer communication with them can allow more real-time reporting there. Bring your own device model. This is key. We know that technology can significantly burden sites and patients. So if you can make it something that the patient can use on their own device, they already know how to use it. And the site doesn't have to store and track down devices, so it's easier for all. And then, in the end, happier site staff. What else could you want here? They won't get study burnt out. So these are some of the obvious benefits, but we do know that with everything comes challenges. And so what we've been finding is where to begin? There really is no standard protocol or consent language for hybrid virtual clinical trials, and the regulatory guidance is very vague. Very few sites, as I said, telemedicine has been in use over 10 years in the healthcare industry, but very few sites are actually trained on the technology and on virtual trials. And as I mentioned, sometimes we are overcomplicating things by throwing all of these technology burdens on the site and patient. They have to store the devices. Coordinators have to serve as tech support. Often there aren't 24-hour helplines, or the helplines aren't in the same time zone. So it makes it rather difficult. And then the key factor, the cost. The proof of return on investment has not really been proven yet. There's no actual case studies that show a cost reduction to sponsors on this. So it makes it a challenge. Everybody knows in theory that it's true, but jumping in with both feet is a different story. So just an example, this is very small and very fuzzy, and I do apologize for that. I think these slides will be available after the webinar, but this is just an example schedule of events that we've been working on creating some standard protocol and consent language on. And basically, this is a rare disease protocol. Most patients that will be participating in the study live more than 2 hours from the nearest study site. So we're working to replace some in-person visits to remote visits, such as having the patient go to a local lab for a blood draw, as well as looking at AE, SAE, ConMed review, and study drug compliance done via a telemedicine chat. So just an example of ways that we're trying to address and overcome the challenges. So that is it for my portion, but I have a great colleague, Megan Caldron, who I'll let come on now. She's with CCT Research and is one of the sites that has done a study with our telemedicine platform, and so she can speak to some of the challenges and some of the benefits from a site perspective. So Megan, I'll hand over to you.
Hi everyone, like Amanda said, I am the Director of Operations at CCT Research, and we were one of the lucky sites that got to be chosen to help out and use their VirTrial technology. And like Amanda said, I think it's really important to consider all of the benefits from all of the sides. Obviously, there's a ton from the sponsor and CRO side as far as benefits, but from a site perspective, there's also a lot of benefit. We know that it's hard to keep patients in the trials and that some won't want to enroll because of distance, time commitment, jobs, all of that. And then we also know how much space is needed to conduct a trial at a site. So being able to even do part of these as a hybrid model or a virtual visit is really a win-win situation for everyone. And I think from a site perspective, the bring your own device model is really, really key. As a coordinator myself recently, I think it's great that all of these sponsors and CROs are excited about all of the new tech that's available, the wearables, the tablets, but a lot of the time that causes more burden on the patient. They don't know how to charge it, they lose it, they forget it. And I think we need to take a step back from that and get them used to just using their own device to communicate via video. It's a lot easier for everyone, and also it helps kind of get on board with that virtual model. Okay. And so for the pilot site, we just did a short, little over a week study. We did include patients of all age ranges, 22 to 79 years old. Participants with Wi-Fi connectivity, so they just downloaded the app on their phone, and we helped them do that in their first in-person visit. And then we, of course, had our computer to be able to video chat with them. And it was really great. We didn't really have any bad or negative feedback from it. So a few tips when first using the tech was always use the user guide. And then the app is really neat because it will automatically send participants reminders. So that takes burden off of your research staff. And of course, we know that patients are busy. They have jobs, they forget, depending on what kind of, maybe it's an Alzheimer's trial. So those automatic reminders really help with patient compliance and keeping those visits, which in turn lets us get better data. Of course, as with anything, we did encounter a challenge. There was a software enhancement that came out a little bit into the study. So we did have a patient that was struggling to connect, and we of course overcame that. We just needed the patient to uninstall and then reinstall the app. And to fix that in the future, now all of the updates are automatically pushed for all of the users. And like Amanda said, and like I sort of spoke of earlier, all of the sites said that they're more convenient, these visits. It's less maintenance. The app is really easy. I think that that's key, is the user friendliness of it. You're not being asked to carry around an extra e-diary or wear an extra monitor. You're doing what most people do every day anyway, which is carry around their cell phone. And the participants loved it. And there was no difference in the age range. Even the older patients, which was a concern that I had, but that was quickly put to rest. Everyone really adopted it and really enjoyed having this as an option. And with that, I will pass it. Amanda, I didn't know if you want to say any closing words.
No, thank you so much, Megan. So I'll take it and pass it now to Scott, or Megan, you need to do that, please.
Whilst we're changing presenters, just a reminder that we do have the chat window and the Q&A window open. So if you do have any questions, please do use that to convey the messaging. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Claire. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. My name is Scott Triber. I'm the COO at Eligo Health Research. I'm joined by Terry Burkhart, my right-hand person, Director of Operations here at Eligo. And we're actually going to go a little bit, I guess backwards in a way. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges in clinical trials and how we at Eligo have overcome some of those challenges. And I think you'll see as we go through this the relevance to the previous presentations around virtual trials. And Eligo, along with Syneos, has put together a system of accelerated research, which is a virtual trial model that'll capitalize on some of the things that we're doing at Eligo and some of the things that Syneos brings to bear. And we can talk about that maybe later in the Q&A if there are questions about it. But really, I think we can all agree, let me just get to the next slide here. We can all agree the challenges are in the current clinical trial process. All of them are centered around patient access. And Eligo was formed about 2.5 years ago to attempt to address some of those challenges. As we all know, about 3% of patients, investigators participate in trials. So, the conventional way of doing research is going straight to existing research sites. So what John Potoff and Chad Moore, the founders of Eligo, believed, and we still believe, is that there's a untapped potential of physicians and access to their patients in the U.S. market. We have not expanded beyond the U.S. at this point. And one of the ways that we're going about that is working directly with independent physicians. So we're working and having discussions with small, mid-sized, and large practices, and talking to them about what it is, what it's like to participate in research. Some have participated in research in the past and dropped out because it was too onerous. They didn't want to deal with the administrative burden and didn't really know how to get started. So we're talking to them about how clinical research can be used as another treatment option. Research is care. Obviously, there's the scientific and intellectual components to clinical trials. There's an additional revenue outside of some of the Medicare and Medicaid that they're getting on their patients. And then it helps them retain their patients. It helps them differentiate themselves from other practices in their area. And, as I mentioned before, some of the historical barriers have been the fact that it's a burden to the site. They don't know how to comply with regulatory submissions. They don't have the staff available to help them get involved in clinical trials. They don't know how to generate new business. Clinical trials, as we know, often require additional vendors and equipment, and they just have a kind of unfamiliarity with the overall research process. So what Elegoo has done, and we started this back in late 2016. Had our first site started in the Austin area, and we've now expanded to over 35 active research sites in the U.S. What we've done is we've provided all of the things that you see on this slide. So from a business development standpoint, we identify and triage opportunities. We do study feasibility utilizing their EHRs. So we sign BAA agreements with every one of our practices that enables us to view their EHR and do searches to find potential patients. We work very closely with the investigators also to ensure that the studies are the right fit for them, the right indication, right therapeutic area. And then we provide a lot of support on the study startup, additional patient recruitment support, contract negotiation, which I will not play down. That is a very critical component. It takes a lot of work. And then Terry will talk a little bit more about study coordination. I won't steal her thunder because that's of anything, that's probably the most important component that we provide to our practices. We embed a study coordinator with any practice. And then last but not least, the financial management component, invoicing customers, making sure that they get paid on time is critical. So I'm going to hand it over to Terry, and Terry's going to talk a little bit about how we ensure our sites are research ready and talk about some of the challenges that we've seen in the last 2 years that we've been doing this. Terry?
Hi, everybody. So, as you can imagine, you're dealing most of the time with principal investigators that are research naive, which I guess is kind of the whole point of us being here. They all have had some experience in their training, but it's just not the same as doing it out in the real practice. So the most important thing, as Scott mentioned, is embedding that study coordinator, and it has been really important that person has a wealth of experience. Putting in research, naive person would not work. So we always make sure that we hire somebody who's got a great deal of experience, or if we have a team, we have at least one person who has a great deal of experience. And that person is really going to work very closely with the PI, making sure that they are, they are educated and then re-educated all along the way about what their responsibilities are, making sure they look at the right things, making sure that they attend the right meetings. And I would say that is probably one of the biggest challenges, is just in the beginning making sure that they live up to all the responsibilities that they have agreed to and that they have as PI. Additionally, so we've been really successful, and we have PIs who are seem like they have a passion for it and are almost relieved, like they're finally doing research that, it's something they loved and wish that they could have been part of, but it's just something they never thought they could have time for. So as Eligo comes in and we bring the expertise and then the administrative support that they need, they can just continue to be a doctor. And then obviously when they're seeing a study patient, they're just doing things according to protocol as opposed to, according to what they would do normally. Let's see, what are some of the other things that we talked about? Vendor selection. So, with a lot of studies, you need testing done. Obviously, not all of that is going to be offered in a regular physician office if you need x-rays or ultrasounds, things like that. So getting those things in place and getting all those contracts signed are something that I can't imagine a practice could could do that. We have a whole department that does contracting and stuff that really does that. And then finding the patients, having the time to go through charts and or call people who have come in through the recruitment companies. That's all our study coordinator plus our administrative team in the corporate office. Is there anything else, Scott, that you wanted me to cover?
No, I think the only other thing that I'd like to add is we didn't put a specific slide about this, is we built our own technology. I think when we started, we try to use best in class technology, and in the background we were building our own what we call IntelliGo database. It includes a CTMS, eSource, financial, payment modules. So it's everything that our sites are going to be able to use to make them more efficient. And that's being rolled out now in all of our new studies. So, and it's something that I think that other practices and site groups may be interested in hearing about as we launch that.
Yeah, I think that was our last slide, isn't it? Yeah. So who do I need to pass it back to?
Myself. Thank you so much. Appreciate all our panelists there. We have been inundated with questions in the chat, as you might expect. And so I'm going to go back to the start with our Econsent and ask one of the key questions that came through is around language capability. So Michael or Holly, would you like to address that question?
Sure.
This is Michael.
Go ahead,
Holly. Talk about how you did it on the study. I think it's good.
Yeah, so for the Adaptable study, we have 2 languages, English and Spanish, and patients are able to switch to their preferred language by clicking a link up at the top, and then the portal will switch over. So we have 2 languages for Adaptable.
And as a vendor, we've produced the same type of technology in about 20 different languages at this point that we use around the world.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Then we had another question, which I thought came up several times during Amanda and Terry's presentation. Sorry, not Amanda and Terry. Amanda and, Terry. And that was around bring your own device and some of the challenges in terms of using a bring your own device from an ethics committee's perspective or an IRB's perspective. And particularly, do they want to review contracts? Are they happy with using that from a data privacy perspective? Any thoughts on that, Amanda?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. That's a great question, and I did notice that Michael Tucker, you had answered it in the panel too. So I don't have too much to add on Michael, but what we found is most central IRBs are very supportive of bringing your own device. And interestingly enough, patients do like this more too. They feel they're more secure than provisioned devices, and they don't like carrying around a second device for use in the study. So we haven't seen any issues from the central IRBs on that point.
That's great. Thank you so much, Amanda. I appreciate that response. And then finally, this is to Scott. Scott, we had a question around how you determine fair market value for providing on-site resources without violating ABAC. Any thoughts on that?
Is this in reference to paying vendors, or are you talking about paying? I wonder if they're talking about paying the physicians.
Let me read the full question for you. It might be helpful. It says, how do you determine fair market value for providing on-site resources without violating ABAC guidances, giving more to one site than to another? What do you put in as justification?
So I don't really fully understand that question. So we staff the sites based on the volume of studies that they have. So obviously, as we add and increase the number of studies, we would add people. I'm not sure if they're talking about paying the salary of one higher than we would at another site, or if they're talking about having more people at one site versus another.
I think, Terry, maybe it's around, maybe they think that this is, I think the difference is that you're taking on those activities for that research naive site, aren't you? So I think actually it's not about you giving funds to a site that is not going to another site. You're actually taking that on. And thank you, Susan, because you've come back.
Oh, so the entire study goes to that site. So, so we sign, we do CTA agreements, master agreements, and then we have work orders for each individual PI. So there's a budget associated with the study that goes on at that site, and then we have a way of splitting up the budget, which is very transparent, which works well with our PIs, as you can imagine. And basically, whatever Eligo does, we keep, and whatever they do, they keep, and whatever needs to be paid out to a vendor is paid out to a vendor. So I don't think it's an issue of fair market value.
Yeah, and to clarify, this is a contract between yourself and the site, isn't it? It's not between the sponsor and the site, so it's not the sponsor. Well,
there are actually, there's actually two. So the contract is with Eligo and with the sponsor, and then we also have a contract with the site. So there's actually two contracts.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, that's wonderful. Well, it is 17:59. We have a host of questions in the chat box, so thank you to all those that have been submitted. We will be writing a written response to each of those questions, and so those will be shared after the webinar with all the materials via the SDRS. Thank you very much to all of our participants. The panel today, I think, have been outstanding. Thank you very much, but also thank you to the audience for all your questions and making it even more interesting. Many thanks to all. Good night.
Thanks, Claire, and thank you to all our panelists today for their time and their expertise. Please check our webinar schedule at myscrs.org. We have another one coming up on May 28th on virtual trials, so be sure to check that one out. For all attendees, please complete the post-webinar survey and evaluation that will pop up after this webinar closes out of WebEx to receive your contact hour credit. If you have any trouble with that, and there's always a few people that do, just send me an email and I'll send you the questions. For more on good technology, business, clinical, oncology practices, and other topics, please check out our SCRS Insight Journal. We publish that quarterly for members. That's found in the members section of our website, myscrs.org. Again, we invite everyone to register for the Asia Pacific and Global Site Solutions Summit this year. Seats are limited and will sell out. We appreciate everyone's participation in today's program. We look forward to having you join us for more webinars in the coming year. Today's session has been recorded. I will be sending out the link to that recording within the next 24 hours, along with the PDF reduction of the slides and an attendance certificate. Contact hours will be available in 30 days. We look forward to your feedback. Thanks again for joining us. Talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.